empirical psychology.
Well, you know, Paul, it's interesting you say existentialist, Buddhist, and then empiricist, is that that's contradictory to the first two. And I just want to maintain, I'm an empiricist, it's absolutely true, and I believe in both inductive and deductive forms of knowledge. I think that the two have to be intertwined. You can't just have theory because it becomes vacant and a mere opinion. It has to be anchored in some kinds of observations to give it strength. At the same time, we discover things through empiricism that we might not have wondered about or explored before. And I don't think either of those things is contradictory at all to being Buddhist, which actually I do describe to, and it's not contradictory at all to being an existentialist. And by the way, being an existentialist is quite congruent with being a Buddhist.
No, I think we disagree. I mean, I'm delighted to see you. I'm going to Frankl again. Frankl said, first is freedom of choice. The second is work. Create something, give yourself to the world. The third thing is experiencing life, exponential meaning. That means life doesn't need to have a goal or purpose. Simply experiencing the joy, the vitality of living itself. Here is the foremost authority on constructivism. So, so you talk about constructive meaning, and you
I can try. I'm not sure exactly what I'm about to say either, although I have a couple of thoughts. Seems like one of the things that people have mentioned a number of times that perhaps I have some thoughts on is this notion of constructing versus finding. Maybe that you're going to find meaning, like it's over there, it's in the corner, somebody left it in the closet, it's under the laundry, and you're going to stumble upon it. I haven't done that yet, but I do think that people construct it. They imbue things with meaning. They're responsible for doing that. They play a role in it. And a lot of people don't like that because it makes it seem like we're not anchored somehow. And yet, oh look, it's me. That's all right. And now I feel a little more oriented. That's right. That's good. So that you can be blamed at the end of this. But I really like the idea. I really like the idea of that people have a role, that they are involved in figuring out, deciding, constructing, imbuing things with meaning. That meaning isn't inherent in things. Because when meaning is inherent in things, there's a tendency that we get very certain about things, and then we assume that because we know what the meaning of things is, that now it's the noble thing to do to go out into the world and make other people believe those same things. I think most of the things that get done that we think are pretty terrible things, people who do them don't necessarily think they're doing terrible things. Right? Only in cartoons do villains twirl their mustaches and say, "I'm on the side of evil." I mean, most people, when they're doing things, think they're on the side of good. They're doing the right thing. They're doing the thing, they figured out what the meaning of things is, and if only these other foolish people would get on board, everything would just be so much better. And so, that to me is a very important thing to think about. And meaning is very personal. And so for me to stand up here, or sit down here, and say to you, here's what's the meaning of things, and here's what makes life worth living, that seems rather laughable to me. I mean, I might have some things that you can consider and say, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting, that's how he's decided to live his life. But I would hate to assume that what I say is what should go for all of you. I think it's up to each of us to decide that. And it's this notion that somehow there's a panel of experts up here, and we know something you don't know. Now maybe some of them do, but I can assure you I don't. I'm pretty sure of that. That's the one thing I'm certain of, that I'm not sure. And the personal construct psychologist George Kelly, he said something that I think is really, really important. He said that the questions that we ask are often much more important than the answers that we give to them. And so the question that we're asking on this panel, I think, is a much more interesting question than any answers we might receive. And so it's more important to ask the question and talk about it than to settle on a final answer. And that the conversation is what's interesting, and the exchange of ideas is what's interesting to me. And so those are my few thoughts and comments on this, and if you find them meaningful.
Any comment on his remark? Any comment? Yes.
I really appreciate what you're saying, Dr. Raskin, about heuristics, meaning it is effective construction. I agree with that. Hitler constructed meaning in the 1920s, and his heuristic led to certain disaster. So there's also hubris attached to the construction of meaning, and I'd like you to talk about that as a panel.
Yeah, but one of the things I've become accustomed to is as soon as you say that you're constructivist and meaning is constructed, people always mention Hitler. It's like clockwork. When's Hitler going to come up in this conversation? Because I think sometimes the implication is that if you say that meaning is constructed or that you are responsible for it, that somehow that doesn't anchor you. And so now you have to tolerate anything. And there's nothing that I disagree with more. Notice I didn't say there's nothing that's further from the truth. There's nothing I disagree with more. I really do disagree with that. Just because I believe that I'm responsible and play a role in developing and creating and advocating for certain ways that I think things should be, does not mean that when somebody else has an alternative construction, I simply have to roll over. Right? Now, oftentimes I want to engage in dialogue, I want to have exchanges, but when somebody else refuses and tries to steamroll you, you have every option open to you on the table. And so resisting that is perfectly reasonable. It's not this idea that somehow, until I can anchor what I believe in the bedrock of truth itself, I'm forbidden from acting. And that's one of the most common criticisms that you get when you talk from a constructivist perspective, and one that has never made any sense to me at all. Because if people get together and decide this is what we believe, this is what we think is right, we don't think that Nazis should be able to do the terrible things that the Nazis did. There's nothing that says because we decided that together that somehow prevents us from doing things because we didn't get it handed down from on high. I think that's a really important thing for people to think about with regards to the idea that people invent meaning. It's a great question.
I just want to make two simple comments. One is that once of all, discovering meaning versus making meaning or constructing meaning, the other question has to do with the meaning of question is subjective, it's possible to find some general principle objectively about meaning. Now, again, my friend, because the whole conference is inspired by Frankl. Now, Frankl said meaning is discovered rather than created, because if anybody can arbitrarily construct meaning, then it is semantic. Meaning discovered is that this guy, Deurzen, Harvard, Deurzen mentioned about the revealed truth. Of Christian and the other religions, you don't create truth about God, heaven, hell. You discover from the revelation. Second thing is the Buddha talk about awakening. It's the aha experience. You do something for years, and suddenly discover that there is deeper meaning and significance in the routine work you've been doing for years. So that is discovery. Science also discovers something like that. Newton sitting on a tree, apple tree. All of a sudden, discovered from inside. Einstein relativity. I don't know where my son discovered it. His what you call this, his discovery he mentioned. All self-discovery. So, second thing that Frankl said that all meaning are individual. Everybody is different. But it's still possible for us to discover some common threads. Relationship authenticity, goodness, serving others, sacrifice yourself for some higher good. So all these are common strengths. Redemption. This guy is doing, by the way, it's a very interesting website called One Effect. It was big. There's all kinds of stories. But tomorrow night, and he will discover there's some common strengths there. So it's possible. So I imagine, I used to be all the people, all of their life, all of the ideal life. So they also common strengths. They offer a world that have supported that life. So it's possible to find some general components, although there's no general principle, there's no general theory at all. I tell for that, I cannot find that. Okay. I look for that, I cannot find either. Okay. I'm no Einstein. Okay. But it's not possible to find one general principle or complex, fundamental component. Authenticity.
I just wanted to kind of make a comment about some neurological or neuroscience findings that are relevant to the constructivist revelation versus construction debate. You do construct meaning in that you have to impose a framework on the world through which you look, because you can't look at everything, so you have to be selective. You point your eyes. That's an act of making meaning. However, meaning is also revealing, because what happens is you impose your meaning structure on the world, and then you act within it. And the world corrects you. And it corrects you because you want it to evolve. If you pretend what isn't there. And what's really interesting is that the systems that correct you, they're not conscious. They're unconscious. And so you can consciously impose a framework of meaning, but the systems that make sure that that isn't pathological to the point of producing your demise will indicate to you, often with anxiety, that the manner in which you're construing the world is insufficient for you to obtain your aims. And so, even within a constructivist viewpoint, there's the necessity for a process that updates the constructivist models, and the meaning that drives that process is the meaning that's revealed and not imposed. So that's the way of solving the paradox.
One more comment, I'm used to being criticized. Okay, one day I was really pissed off. There's some kind of popular psychology listener, criticizing me at this conference, and also proposed an idea that goodness has no meaning. Goodness, if you can be anything other than goodness, could be anything you want it to be. Goodness has no intrinsic meaning. Good and evil are different. One common thread for all the research on meaning of life is that you cannot make a life if you're not praiseworthy, you're not worthwhile, you don't conform to the highest value, you don't have a positive value on society. Goodness has intrinsic value. It's not anything you do. You give it. Sure.
I have to say something.
Good.
I don't think it is as simple as that. I don't think we can distinguish good and evil quite in the way in which people are suggesting right here. For instance, Jordan, when you speak, you're very self-assertive. And you speak about totalitarianism, but I experience you as imposing a kind of totalitarianism. I feel that you are so self-assured about your point of view that you take over my space. I act differently in the world than you do. I act in a more modest way. I act in a more careful way. I act in a more observant way of where everybody else is in the room and what everybody else might feel or think. So for me, when I listen to you with your fire and brimstone, I feel a little bit frightened and I feel a little bit upset. And to me, that is a little bit of evil incorporated, embodied. Hannah Arendt spoke about the banality of evil. And that is where evil comes from. It is how we act in relation to each other. Right now, I'm evil to you. And I'm doing that quite deliberately. and it takes me a great deal of effort to do that. But I feel somebody needs to say these things. You say you find your limit against something that is unconscious. Well, I disagree. I think one of the meanings of life is that we need to find the ability to use our capacity for consciousness and our capacity for conscience and our capacity for observation of all that goes on to correct each other in a constant dialogue with respect for each other.